regional economic integration, structural reforms, innovative development, and connectivity. These are the central themes for APEC 2014, held in Beijing, China. Join us this week as CCTV News brings you top-name interviews from executives and business leaders at or observing APEC 2014 as they share their perspectives on Asia-Pacific economic cooperation. Only on CCTV News. Only on Biz Talk.
Welcome to the special APEC edition of Biz Talk at Beijing's National Convention Center. I'm Cheng Lei. The CEO Summit being held here is the biggest business event on the APEC calendar. And have we got a lineup for you? Head honchos from top companies in machinery, retail, insurance, technology, just to name a few, tell us their strategies, plus what the APEC agenda means for their businesses and your money. Don't miss the special APEC edition of Biz Talk, only on CCTV News.
A solid step towards regional integration. On November 11th, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation's 21 member economies announced it will begin an effort to push forth the proposed free trade area of the Asia-Pacific.
我们决定启动亚太自由贸易区进程。
Known as the FTAAP, this Pan-Asia-Pacific free trade deal endorsed by China would be the most comprehensive and inclusive in the region when completed. Experts say the plan could pave a way out from the stalled WTO Doha round quicksand and act as the ultimate point of convergence for the over 150 regional trade agreements scattered across the Asia-Pacific.
One of the topics here is a free trade area of Asia-Pacific. In your view, how is it necessary to have a unified trade system?
APEC region economies are actually very large. It consists of 21 economies around the Pacific Rim. And these economies represent some 45% of the global population, over 50% of global output. And here in China, we know the Chinese economy is the largest in the world in terms of trade when you add exports and imports together. So free trade definitely will benefit the regional economies.
And currently there are over 50 trade pacts in the region already. How far away from a unified trade system?
You know, trade negotiations usually take a very long time. Conceptually, it's a good idea to form a regional trade agreement, but all the countries have to agree to some basic rules.
What do you think this free trade area means for this Asia-Pacific?
Look, I think it's important globally as well as in the Asia-Pacific region to facilitate trade, to facilitate growth. And through the G20 process, the finance ministers committed to work towards increasing global GDP by 2% over the next 5 years. Facilitating trade, assisting in trade between countries is going to be a very important element of that.
There are already over 50 trade pacts in this region, and so could you tell me where are we in, down the road to a unified trade system?
Well, look, I think the TPP or the FTAAP will provide the vehicle for that. Both are important initiatives because they are beginning the discussions of having a broad group of countries involved in free trade agreements. This is important for the world economy. It's important for the movement of material from one country to another. It's important that industry and other segments of the economy can import the most efficient and the lowest cost goods for them to produce using. It's important in terms of resource security and the need to ensure long-term availability of products. In our case, obviously, the raw materials, which are the building blocks of developing nations. I think it's also good for relationships and bringing the world together.
What sort of mood are you feeling at the APEC meetings?
I think a mood of constructivism. I think a mood of cautious optimism, and across the world. I think if you look at one region which is doing well, in spite of all the challenges, it still remains the Asia-Pacific region. So I think people are thoughtful, but remain optimistic.
We've been hearing a lot about regional integration, pushing for connectivity, and also these multilateral free trade agreements. What's all this going to do to the insurance business?
I think continue to open it up. I think these are positive things. I think free trade generally is positive. Putting down barriers again is generally positive. And these are all steps in the right direction, and we are very supportive of that.
Do you think it will be implemented then?
I think many will be implemented over time. Many will take longer than expected. But I think the direction of travel is clear. The direction of travel everybody is committed to. We see continued economic growth within the countries themselves. I think the factors, as I say, the sort of seminal factors that I mentioned earlier remain very much in place across the region, where the protection gap is $32-33 trillion. So the opportunity is almost an unlimited one. And therefore the macro position is strong. And for us, the micro position, our own companies, the businesses we have in the individual countries look to be in strong positions, and we remain very optimistic about next year and going into the future.
What do you make of the political undercurrents here at the APEC summit?
I think it's an incredibly important meeting because you do see governments from across the world here, and you get access to governments across the world here. I think the undercurrents that I've seen and felt are positive, and people want to talk, want to form bilateral and multilateral agreements, and I say that direction is one that is positive for all of us.
And is that how you see the regional economic growth as well, with cautious optimism?
Yeah, the drivers of our business are really around urbanisation, are around demographic change, are around the emergence of middle class, around the underpenetration of insurance, and all of those factors are beginning to move through the system. If you combine that with, again, what traditionally we see in insurance, when GDP per capita reaches close to 10,000, there's an enormous takeoff of insurance. All of these factors are very encouraging to us, and they're factors that are going to sustain for many, many, many years.
But completing the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific is a long-term goal for APEC, which will require extensive talks and negotiations between its diverse member economies. In the near term, though, enhancing Asia-Pacific connectivity is one path that APEC leaders agree will further strengthen ties in the region. As one of the major outcomes at APEC 2014, a connectivity blueprint was unveiled, which seeks to boost the region's infrastructure, institutions, and people-to-people exchanges by 2025. Meanwhile, China has pledged $40 billion to set up a Silk Road Fund, with a focus on infrastructure building across Central and South Asia. The country is also at the forefront to build the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, with a mandate to finance development projects in the region.
Another hot topic is Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. In your view, how would public and private sectors cooperate on this sector?
The Asian economies still need a lot of infrastructure construction. So forming a bank to support infrastructure building around the Asian economies is a very good idea. And in this area, public funds are important, but private funds increasingly will play a bigger role as well, as infrastructural needs around the region are enormous, especially in some of the underdeveloped economies.
How would infrastructure attract private sectors?
Private capital is always attracted to higher returns. So if infrastructure investments around the Asia-Pacific region offer good returns, private capital will naturally go to that area. We know the Asian economies have different needs for infrastructure. Some countries have already built up very good infrastructure, but you also have some underdeveloped countries which are still in need of roads, airports, railways. So if infrastructure projects offer stable, longer-term returns, I think private capital in combination with public capital will be attracted to invest in these areas in the future.
The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which was signed into a memorandum last month, what will this initiative present opportunities for you?
Look, there are a range of banks and financial institutions that support our projects. and the Asia Infrastructure Bank could be another vehicle to provide that. Importantly, the world, as it develops, needs our raw materials, and we need to find the best way of actually delivering on that. There is a shortage of infrastructure of around $1 trillion around the world. So all initiatives to foster investment in infrastructure are a very worthy thing.
And what about getting this region to become more connected? That means more infrastructure. That's great for Caterpillar, right?
Infrastructure is great for Caterpillar. But typically infrastructure has been great for the world also. It makes economies, countries more competitive. We've seen, with half the population here in APEC region, most of the growth in the last 25 years, a lot of the growth in the APEC region, we've seen tremendous infrastructure build up, but it's still very much behind where it wants to be and where it should be. And as we look forward to the next 25 years, that will come. People want electricity. They want roads, bridges, modern things.
Mm-hmm. And other geographies that you're particularly bullish on?
The area of the best growth right now, amazingly, is the United States. And little by little, little by little, the United States is growing. Our economic growth numbers lately have been a little bit stronger. They're nowhere near where they need to be, but it's very positive. As we look around the world, China, I think, will always be a huge construction equipment and infrastructure market. Granted, the market's a little soft right now as China goes through reform and transition, but it's there. It's the largest single construction equipment market in the world. We have other pockets around the planet. Africa right now is growing very nicely. There's a middle class there that's emerging, and they're wanting to join the middle class like the rest of the world.
The Chinese president proposed some specific gestures and actions coming from China for the support of Asia Infrastructure Development Bank. You are coming from Inter-America Development Bank. When you are looking at your colleagues here working on this possibility, what do you think are some of the challenges and possible results?
Well, look, first of all, when one thinks of development finance, we must understand that there is such needs in terms of infrastructure investment in the years ahead, both in emerging markets and in developed markets. When I look at Latin America and the Caribbean, the region where we basically operate in, we look at the levels of investment that we have been doing in infrastructure, which are around 2.5%, and they need to double simply to keep up with the needs, but more importantly with the force that we have to put to productivity, which we have to increase, which means that if we are to keep up with Asian rates of growth, if we are to keep up with Asian competitiveness, and that should be our benchmark, we must double our investment in infrastructure. So this means that the world as a whole is going to need more and more investment in infrastructure.
And what does that mean for our economies?
Well, it means certainly in the case of emerging economies that if you do smart investments in infrastructure, they should translate in both growth and in enhancing competitiveness and productivity.
And jobs as well.
Well, of course, jobs come hand in hand with the kind of public investment associated with infrastructure.
China has made this gesture, but at the same time also inviting others to join in. What do you think of a possibility like this? What could they mean for the cooperative spirit that these economies should have? Does it really happen, do you think, our world these days when it comes to politics?
Well, look, I think we live in a world where it's fundamental. We are so integrated as world economies today that we must understand that we need to cooperate much better.
What free trade means to us is really the ability to help more patients and consumers around the world. When we open up trade borders, frankly, we're cultivating greater innovation, greater options for patients and consumers to consider, and frankly, more ways of collaborating across different systems. So we think free trade is very important, ultimately, in our ability to serve patients and consumers.
I thought I would take the opportunity of being here at APEC to to understand the landscape, talk to some of my friends who are in various part of the society, and just get a sense of where are some of the opportunities. So we're not going to give up the China market, but it might take a little longer to get back in place.
The need for more mobility of resources and mobility to be able to move seamlessly, from one APEC economy to another. Rule of law, consistency of that law is absolutely critical to really drive the services agenda forward. So there's a series of areas that I think really need some attention. They're challenging areas, to say the least, but nonetheless, I think really will be important to deal with in order to open up the whole services arena, which I think is going to be one of the key drivers of economic development for years to come.
At APEC 2014, reforms and innovation have been hailed as the new sources of sustainable growth. Policymakers in China are determined to shift the Chinese economy away from an export and investment-led growth model and focus more on consumption. At the same time, innovation is seen as key to China's efforts to upgrade its economic structure, move up the global value chain, and improve the country's competitiveness on the global scene.
Chinese government doled out a series of reforms during the past years. What is your expectation for the next wave of reforms? Is it coming from the fiscal policy, the financial sector, or even from the state-owned enterprises?
Well, in 2015, we are expecting more reforms to be announced by the Chinese leadership. In terms of financial reform, I think we can expect some interest rate liberalization, but that's going to follow a 2-year timetable. There may be more freedom in terms of banks being able to set deposit rates. These days, deposit rates are still pretty much determined by the central bank. We're also expecting the ongoing reform in state-owned enterprises to continue, plus fiscal reform, both fiscal reform for local governments as well as the central government. So all these reforms will be very important to help the Chinese economy to grow in a much more sustainable way.
And of all China's structural reforms, which ones are you most excited about?
I think what was very significant to us was the policy statement coming out of the State Council in August a few months ago, looking at the 10 areas of focus for the insurance industry. I think the focus on the insurance industry, what it can do, how it can help, how it can support, the importance of it, all of these I think are critical elements, and to see that is very exciting.
As you mentioned, in September, China's State Council decided to fully liberalize the market here. What does that mean for competition, and how are you exactly planning to gain market share against your competitors?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's good that the Chinese government is thinking about that, because the more liberalized the market is, the faster the help for the local customers and multinationals customers with regard to logistics can become. We can add value here as an international experienced company. We can transfer best practices from other places. So we always tell governments, the more you liberalize your market, the better it will be for your economy, your local customers. So as I said, we will look into that if there are opportunities, and if we identify opportunities for us, we definitely will go into that.
And Dow's joint venture in Saudi is one step in your emerging market strategy. And what's any similar deals in Asia Pacific area?
The long story and the short answer for that is there an energy advantage somewhere in Asia? And the answer is not really. I mean, China is still a very high cost. We have to find lower cost shale gas, lower cost ways to get inputs. But what we're doing instead, and I think it's the right strategy, is using Asia's considerable human talent. By investing in people, investing in R&D centers, investing in Chinese scientists, investing in Asian scientists, we can do value add. I once heard from one of your famous leaders that about a certain type of smartphone. We in China make most of the smartphones for someone else, but we make 80% of the smartphones but only have 20% of the profits. We'd like it the other way around.
In its latest assessment of the global economy, the OECD says the U.S.-led recovery will continue to run on low gear. Experts say among the major uncertainties, the U.S. Federal Reserve's ending of its quantitative easing program could bring further disruption to emerging market economies as the global recovery is still weak. And that weak recovery could be made all the more acute as China rebalances its economy which will see moderating growth that will pressure demand for resource commodities and exports from abroad. As the world continues its transition from recession to normalcy, APEC economies, which represent over half of the world's GDP, has a crucial role to play in supporting the global economy.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has ended its quantitative easing last month. By contrast, Bank of Japan stimulated a large amount of money into the system. How all those moves can impact China's economy?
Well, this time around, the U.S. Federal Reserve has indicated very clearly the timetable to end quantitative easing, and we're expecting sometime in 2015 U.S. interest rates to go up. Because the message is very well broadcast, the market already has absorbed that information. So we don't expect a large impact on the Chinese economy. Now, in terms of the BOJ action recently, we think if Japan can improve its economy, can get inflation up, that's actually very good for the Asia-Pacific regional economies.
Are we going to expect some easy measures from the People's Bank of China?
Well, the Chinese Central Bank has been using targeted measures to inject more liquidity into the commercial banks. Although the central bank in China has not lowered interest rates or the reserve requirement ratio, but in the last several months, we've seen the central bank injecting some liquidity into the commercial banks, enabling the commercial banks to lend more to companies and individual home buyers.
China's economy is slowing down in the third quarter compared with the first 2 quarters. What is your outlook for the China's economy in the fourth quarter and possibly beyond into the next year?
Well, we're seeing a slowdown in the Chinese economy in the last several quarters. That's quite reasonable because we've seen the Chinese economy growing very rapidly for many years, reaching a size that's $11 trillion today, which means China is now the second largest economy in the world. So because of the base that's very large these days, we cannot expect the economy to continue growing at double-digit rates. So going forward, I think 7.5% or 7% will be something that we can expect in terms of growth rates. But most importantly, we think we need to focus on the sources of growth, where the growth is actually coming from. For example, in 2014, most of the growth has come from consumption, which is quite encouraging, which means the Chinese economy has reduced its dependence on exports and investments. So the quality of growth is actually improving, although the quantity and the pace of growth are slowing. For many years, the Chinese leadership has been trying to transition the economy away from dependence on investments, more towards private consumption. So we're seeing that happen. That's quite encouraging. So the most important task is to improve the quality of growth, improve personal consumption, environmental protection, also modern service industries. I think the Chinese economy is going through an important transition. Although in the future, we may see growth rates decelerate, the quality of growth will actually improve.
China, maybe, one of the largest clients, it's shifting its growth model from investment-driven, infrastructure-driven to more consumption-led. How will that change going to impact your bottom lines?
Yeah, that's true. However, there will continue to be urbanization and industrialization. But if you look at consumption-led economy, that also requires the fundamental raw materials that we supply, the iron ore, the aluminium, the copper, the industrial minerals and so on. You can't actually develop without these fundamental building blocks of industrialization.